Ready? Play.
Welcome back to another episode of Painting Lines. Last week we wrapped up the first leg of the Sunshine Double out in Indian Wells, and this week we'll be covering the first week of the Miami Open. And I just want to give a little shout out. It is the seventh anniversary of the infamous quote, "Man, you better shut your fuck up." And you know where that's from, right?
Medvedev talking to Tsitsipas,
Medvedev
obviously.
Tsitsipas. Yes, that is when the beef began. He's a little boy, he doesn't know how to fight. So yeah, we've come a long way since then. But just jumping right in, Aiden, what do you think has been the biggest difference, or in other words, what sticks out to you the most from the first week of Indian Wells to the first week of Miami?
I mean, I think just the people that have survived the first couple of rounds, right? So many upsets in the first few rounds here, and all of the guys that made deep runs last week, it feels like are already out of this tournament. So just the players that are still in are very different compared to last week.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I'm getting a little annoyed about like all this inconsistency. Like I just want a couple players to dominate again. Is that too much to ask?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. That's why the big three was so much of a standout thing because we hadn't seen that in the past, really, where guys just dominated that at that level. And now we're getting back to a point where the top guys are better, but they don't win week in, week out.
Yeah, and I feel like we knew we were in that transitional phase, but we wanted to essentially cut it short because we were quick to call Alcaraz Sinner, basically that new era. Maybe Runa, but not so much. But the transitional period is still very much alive. Like it was too early to call it over with Alcaraz and Sinner, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think we just want to believe that certain guys are going to dominate and step into the role of that big three, but it just we don't know whether people are going to be able to do that.
Yep, we were definitely privileged to watch those. But anyway, just kind of getting into the tournament. Actually, before we get into the tournament, I have a funny story. I ran into, or not really ran into, but I walked right past Nicholas Jarry at the Miami airport on Wednesday. Pretty funny.
Wild.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm walking. I see this tall ass dude with a Wilson shirt, like Wilson bag, clearly tennis player body, kind of lanky. And I'm like, dude, that's got to be Jerry. It's got to be. And I walked past him, and then I had to do a double take and then a triple take, and then I snapped a picture of him from the back and
Yeah.
I sent it out. But yeah, I wish it kind of hit me sooner, and I would have said like, hey, what's up, man? Like, not really stopped to talk because he was alone. I was surprised. I thought usually tennis players travel in a posse, but right after I thought I saw him, right after I was like 98% sure it was him, I looked up like, why is he leaving so early? Like that was the day the tournament started. And he had just pulled out with an injury. So he didn't even play at all. Like last
Gee.
minute pull out too.
You're like, dude, what are you doing?
I know, I
Where are
know.
you
Like,
going, dude?
yeah, yeah. And he made it pretty far last year too. He had some points to defend. I want to say quarters.
Yeah, sucks.
Unfortunate, yeah. But yeah, all right. So now actually getting into the tournament, let's talk some headlines before we kind of get into the results. One of the things that stuck out to me here was there was a little I would say drama, some controversy. So the tournament, the Miami Open pulled a little bait and switch on the Brazilian fans. So what happened was Fonseca and Humbert were slated to play on Grandstand, which is like essentially the second biggest stadium out there, and then all the Brazilians wanted to watch Fonseca. There's a huge Brazilian crowd, especially in South Florida. So some of them got there as early as like 10 a.m. to go watch this match to get a seat in the stadium. 5 minutes before the match is supposed to start, they switched the match to stadium and then they put Draper and Mensick on grandstand. So first, there's a just massive like trample of people leaving the stadium. Second of all, the first couple games of the Fonseca Umber match in stadium had no one in the stadium because everyone that wanted to watch was out in grandstand. And then third, the fans kind of got screwed here too because they were forced to upgrade their tickets, like pay an extra, I think $10 to get into stadium, which at the end of the day, I think kind of resembles exactly what we've kind of touched on before about the Miami Open being a strictly for profit tennis tournament. Like I think the director here just completely dropped the ball on this.
Yeah, I mean, it really, like you said, shows how much it's just becoming a almost just consumed by the business end rather
Hmm.
than any sort of joy for tennis. And it does kind of suck. I mean, that's what you're seeing, and I think a lot of sports. I mean, famously going to another sport that with the Luka Doncic trade
Hmm.
to the Los Angeles Lakers for any basketball fans out there, they say that one of the reasons they did it was simply because they didn't want to sign him to a supermax deal. And so they looked at it purely as a business perspective, like we don't want to spend this money,
Hmm.
rather than considering the fact that they were trading a player that would be massive for their franchise for the next decade. So that you're seeing this in all sports where people are just going, "Oh, how can we just extract the maximum value out of this rather than trying to make it a great experience for the fans?"
Exactly. And even the players too. I don't think it's very fair for them. But yeah, as you said, extracting maximum value, I did look more into it and apparently the owners of the Miami Open are gearing up to sell to a private equity company. So it's just it fits right in with exactly, what they're trying to do here. Also, this was just a PR nightmare too, because I saw this on Twitter. It was one of those things where you had fans just posting videos of insane crowds, putting rants on there. Like, it's just not what you want to see as a tournament director. Like, I feel like last year the big PR disaster was Casper Ruud talking about the facilities and how, they get a couple towels and the locker room is basically a trailer. And then this year it's just a total fan debacle where you switch up a match 5 minutes before it's supposed to start.
Yeah, they just I feel like that whole Hard Rock Stadium enterprise, whatever it is just trying to, like I said, get the maximum amount of value they can, bringing
Hmm.
in the Formula One race there and having the bringing the uh, tennis tournament from its other venue to that stadium is just, yeah, clearly they're just not really caring about the fan or the player experience.
Yep, definitely. All right, now for something a little lighter here, Sebastian Corda got his first top 10 win since last summer, and it was a big one too. It was Steph Tsitsipas in 2 sets. I found this to be a little bittersweet because I'm really happy for Corda. I pretty much root for him every single tournament, thinking, all right, this will be his breakout. I'm very optimistic on his performance because he's very talented. But then on the other hand, I'm kind of sad. Like we are seeing Stefanos Tsitsipas's career essentially digress in real time, and I don't like it because he's been around for so long, and it's just that whole kind of lost generation is starting to fade out. I feel like him, Medvedev, Rublev, like kind of Zverev in the last couple months,
Yeah,
they're
since
just
the
not
Australian Open.
since the Australian Open, they're just not looking great. I feel like they're just kind of hanging on by a thread here, like about to get pushed out when you even have older guys who have been there around longer than they have still performing at a high level. So
Yeah,
I don't
I
know what to
mean,
think of this.
to me, I think the big thought here is, like you said, 7 years since that famous comment that Medvedev said to
Hmm.
Tsitsipas, and you think about where those two guys were at that point 7 years ago, and they were two of the top players in the game back then, and now 7 years later, there's still guys that are in the top 15. So they've been at the top or near the top for so long that you have to be like, I guess it does make sense that eventually they're going to start this kind of regression from a peak level of play. We can hope that they would start to perform better, but the issue is just that, like a lot of guys, we've talked about this before, but they got a weird situation where some players during the big three era peaked and they had their peak and then their fall, all while the big three were still dominating. These guys had their peak while the big three were still out there and then kind of started to regress. And then the big three disappeared, but they were already past their prime, it seems
Hmm.
like.
Yeah, I know. And I feel like, we've kind of touched on this before, but about the big four having, 20-year careers. I was like, oh, is that going to be the new norm? But like we're realizing that's an anomaly. Like this is the most normal career trajectory for a tennis player.
100%.
It's not 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
And then speaking of another guy, Kyrgios, he also got his first win in what, like 2 years, 2.5 years.
Yeah, they said a day number. I remember I saw
Hmm.
somewhere, but I didn't really remember what it was.
Yeah, this one, it was funny. So I think he pulled a Nadal here because after the match, he was saying he took 5 painkillers and his wrist was completely numb. And it just
Yeah,
reminds me of that French Open final where Nadal, I think, had a broken foot and then beat Casper Ruud. And then the next day, when they were both flying out, he was on crutches. I couldn't even put pressure on it.
wild. Well,
Shot
yeah.
him up.
To me, this match though kind of feels like almost a farewell win, where it doesn't seem like it's setting up a comeback for Kyrgios. It just feels like, oh, he's gonna get a win here, a win there, and then he's gonna just eventually retire.
Yeah, that's a good point. That is because he was even he thought of it too. Like he was very emotional. He thought, hey, maybe I'd never even win a tennis match again.
Yeah, exactly,
Hmm.
exactly.
All right, so let's kind of touch on the Americans here real quick. Nakashima and Korda, they get into the round of 16. These guys to me fly under the radar completely. And even Kyrgios, like someone we had just mentioned, he tweeted out that Nakashima might be the most underrated guy on tour and like how he continues to impress. And I just kind of want to hear your thoughts on this.
I mean, Nakashima, I definitely rated him highly. I had him. I remember beating Shelton in my Australian Open bracket, and then he lost, and then Shelton made like what the semifinal or
Yeah,
something
semis.
crazy. Um, but yeah, I think he's definitely underrated by a lot of people. I mean, think about the fact that he made the what round of 16 at the U.S. Open last year.
Hmm.
Uh, Definitely solid there. I think that it's just there's so many Americans that are very good, and so you when you think of who are the top Americans, he doesn't come to mind. But he's that doesn't mean that he's not a high level player.
Yeah, that's a good point. I feel like if he was a player in a different country, he'd probably be like one of the top players there. But here he just kind of gets overshadowed by all
Yeah,
the
well,
great Americans.
it's really like there's about 6 or 7 guys that are ranked higher than him, even
Hmm.
though he's in like the top 70 or top
Yeah.
60.
Yeah. And remember in the US Open when he did make the round of 16, didn't they have edits for all the guys
That was so
except
funny.
him?
They had like this whole Americans edit, and it was
Yeah.
like, oh, this guy Tiafo, Fritz, I don't remember who the Shelton maybe no Shelton. I don't
Tommy
remember
Paul.
whoever it was. Yeah, maybe Tommy Paul.
Yeah.
And then it was just like they just showed him in the graphic, but they didn't actually have like an interview him with him or highlights
Yeah.
of Nakashima.
Yeah, under the radar guy. But then more Americans here. Fritz, Opelka, Tiafo, they all into the round of 32. Opelka did lose to Mahac next round, and then Fritz and Tiafo are playing as we speak. It looks like Fritz will beat Shapovalov. I think he's up a break in the second set, and he won the first. Lerner Tien, he loses to Fonseca. This was next gen final rematch, something that we are looking forward to. I will admit I did bet on Lerner Tien because he was plus 240, so I did not win that.
Yeah, I mean, I we were talking about that bet before, and I feel like the thing about it was just that Fonseca, because he had beaten him both times in the next gen finals, like they were gonna give Tien pretty heavy underdog status.
Yeah, and at least it was a three setter. It was tight.
Definitely, yeah, close match.
But a bet that I did hit that I'm pretty impressed about is Mickelson loses to Ugo. So that was plus 380. And I was just kind of figuring Mickelson, I think, had to withdraw from the previous tournament for like an illness
Yeah,
and
remember he was
injury.
against Medvedev and he
Medvedev,
played like
yeah,
two games.
exactly. So that was fresh in my mind, and I'm thinking like, all right, well, if I wager a small amount here, it's probably
Big
it
payoff.
could hit, yeah, big payoff. So it did. And then Tommy Paul, he loses to Sarandala. This one was pretty disappointing because you always expect him to make runs in these tournaments, especially in
Yeah,
the
I
Sunshine
feel like
Double.
Tommy Paul, it feels like a kind of disappointing sunshine double because he had a tough draw, played Medvedev in the Indian Wells, where Medvedev was playing pretty well,
Hmm.
obviously, made the semis. And then here comes in, loses to another guy that's been playing very solid tennis. I mean, Sorondolo did well in Indian Wells and is doing well here, but just disappointing because Tommy Paul, we had high expectations going into these
Yeah,
tournaments.
yeah, we always do, especially for Tommy. And then last but certainly not least, Brooksby and Jerome lose first round. I thought I'd mention these guys, especially since Jerome had a pretty good run last tournament.
Yeah.
And then Brooksby got a win too.
Yeah. Brooksby beat
Before.
FAA in last
Yeah,
tournament,
yeah,
but
you were at that one. So that pretty much wraps up our headlines. Aiden, you want to take us through these first round losses?
yeah, I mean, that's really what's stood out so far this tournament is the amount of first round losses we've seen. Not necessarily like round of 64, round of 120, but like the first match these players have played, they've lost. Just kicking it off with Alcaraz on Friday, loses to Goffin, and just a crazy one to see, especially because Goffin lost to Deminar in Indian Wells, and wasn't that close. So expect this match to kind of just be like, okay, Alcaraz gonna get an easy win, get through his first round, and then all of a sudden you just can't defeat this old guy that I guess Goffin has that high peak level if he's playing well, but just not what I was expecting to see here.
Yeah, it was pretty funny. I didn't catch the match because I was traveling, but I did watch the highlights, and it still felt like it was an Alcaraz highlight reel. Like he was making crazy plays, but then he was also double faulting, making errors. So he's just didn't really have a complete game. And this one was another, I would say, lucky bet because I was just looking at the odds. I'm like, dude, plus 1400 for Goffin. Like I might as well put $1 on it, and it hit. I won $15. So
Yeah. I
kind
mean,
of
this
crazy.
this is one of those things though where Alcaraz losing here, I think feel like going into the Sunshine Double with no Sinner playing. I this is probably an overestimation, but I almost expected Alcaraz to come out with at least one of them.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
the fact that he not only didn't win either, but didn't even come that a semifinal and a first round exit,
Hmm.
didn't even come that close to winning them.
I know it's kind of crazy because people are all wondering like what is going on, and there was a thread on Reddit just kind of like, hey, what's going on with Alcaraz? And something that stood out to me was someone mentioned his serve is not there. It's not where it needs to be. It's not really a weapon, and then also his reliance too much on his coach.
Yeah, maybe he needs to talk to Sinner about revamping his serve because obviously we know Sinner made that massive step up when he elevated his serve game and became kind of a dominant force.
Yeah, good point. Good point there.
But yeah, another match on Friday that kind of stood out was Medvedev losing to Munar. Uh, I feel like it's just another symptom of Medvedev not playing where we hoped he would. I mean, he hasn't had a title. I think I saw since 2023, and we're 3 months into 2025 now. So not a great sign there. It just shows that he's kind of on that like past his peak and he's on the downturn. Maybe he'll settle in like the mid teens, but it doesn't look like he's playing like a top 10 guy.
Yeah, Indian Wells was kind of a tease there. I was like, oh, Medvedev's back. We're gonna see him. You know, he's done losing, and then this. But yeah, it's unfortunate. Not really much to say here. You know, I feel like we talk about him every week, just needing to do something.
100%. But then moving into Saturday, we started this one off with a loss from the Indian Wells champion, Draper. And you kind of made a comment about this one, but it does seem like the load management helped him so much going into Indian Wells. And then the fact that he's unable to kind of rest coming into Miami may have impacted this because he immediately loses.
Yeah, totally. I even called it last week, just basically like I don't see Draper going that far in Miami because of the conditions and because of his deep run at Indian Wells. So I hope he figures it out because I don't want him to be, you know, another like every other tournament type of guy. Like if it's even going to get to the point where he's going to skip tournaments to rest, not just play them and then lose first round.
Yeah. I mean, I guess there are only certain tournaments I feel like that happen really back to back like this that are
Hmm.
massive, but still, I mean, you hope that players can play a couple tournaments in a row.
Yeah, yeah. I'm kind of excited to see him on clay. I feel like he hasn't really had many results on clay, has he?
Not that I know of.
No, yeah. So he's just a hard and grass guy.
Yeah, let's see what happens. But anyway, Rublev also lost on Saturday, and this is a guy that we've definitely talked about his inconsistencies, and it seemed like his mental stability was tested here.
Oh yeah, I mean, he double faulted on set point in the first set to lose it, which I feel like at that point it's all mental, right? Like it's going through your head, you're clearly shaken up, and that's unfortunate. I don't know, man. He I thought the fast courts would have helped him out here, but maybe not. I'm not really too sure.
Yeah. And then Runa also lost early. He was a guy that made the final at Indian Wells and then comes in here and loses to Opelka with the massive serve. So not a great look for him either.
Yeah, and this kind of solidifies the theme, right? Like all the guys who did well at Indian Wells are now out first round. But something Opelka said that I found pretty interesting was he was in the post match interview and he was saying, he's like, hey, something really good about, my play style is I basically have a 50-50 chance of beating any opponent, which, is a blessing and a curse because when it's someone better, I like to tell myself that. But when I'm playing someone who's worse or not highly as ranked as I am, I don't really mention that, which is funny because yeah, he has the potential to beat Djokovic. He beats Runa here. And then, he also can't really finish out other people too. So,
Yeah, it's I think it makes sense because when you think about it, a lot of his matches come down to how he plays in two tie breaks.
yeah,
So it's like, okay, if he wins two tie breaks, any player can win two tie breaks if they win, if they do decent, right?
yeah.
So it comes down to a matter of a couple of points every single match, no matter who he's playing against, it feels like.
Yeah, totally, totally. Speaking of Opelka, did you catch the highlights with him and Eubanks?
I did not, but I
Dude, it was
assume it
so
was a surf
funny.
fest.
Surf fest. And then it just looked kind of awkward. You had like two big ass guys who didn't really move well, just kind of like on the tennis court. Just not really aesthetically pleasing tennis. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. I mean, when you have two guys just with massive serves and that's such a big part of their game, it
Yeah.
just 90% of the time it's not the prettiest tennis, let's say.
No, no. They looked like giants out there too. Like
Yeah.
baby
But
deer running around.
yeah. Um but then last, let's talk about Shelton losing to Coleman Wong. Another big server here with
To
Shelton. And
who?
yeah, I mean, another guy that we don't really know that much about. But it was actually an interesting match. I mean, he was down a break in the last set and then battled back, but then ended up losing in a tiebreak. And just kind of tough for a guy that we like Tommy Paul, we expect a lot from and didn't get to see it here.
People on X got after Ben Shelton pretty tough here. They were kind of saying that he was showboating a lot, that he was too cocky, and that he still lost this match. Like it was in in my opinion, I like when he does it because it makes tennis more interesting and it's kind of fun to watch. But he was like really showboating on certain points too, and like kind of acting a little bit like a cocky dude. So this should be humbling for him. Let's just
I
put it
mean,
that way.
he's still got that college tennis attitude.
Yeah, he's got like the NFL DB swagger
Yeah.
as a tennis player.
Yeah, like celebrating when someone misses a shot.
Literally gonna celebrate anything.
Incomplete.
Yeah, yeah, I know.
But anyway, that about wraps up what we wanted to talk about for the first couple of rounds. Anyway, you ready to hop into segments here, Eric?
Yeah, let's do it. Hey guys, before we jump in, we have some exciting news. We recently partnered with TruePro. They're a great place to buy strings, grips, and tennis apparel. Use discount code Painting Lines, that's one word, for 20% off store wide. You can find the link in our bio.
Sounds good. With what's new this week, there's a lot of stuff to talk about. So let's just jump right into it here. What was the first thing you saw?
First thing I saw was on X. I open up X and I see a picture of Djokovic and RFK. So they were photographed playing tennis together. I thought this was pretty funny. And then you had Ben Rothenberg, like the social justice warrior, woke tennis journalist. He, of course, had a comment. He quoted the tweet or the X and said, entirely unsurprising. And this kind of sparked a huge debate on the thread because you had a lot of people who were on his side, and then you had a lot of people who took Djokovic's defense and basically was saying like, look at all the fallout from the vaccine. Like Djokovic is a trailblazer. Like his hindsight looks good. Anyway, I just thought it was good to see like an even amount of discourse. Like it wasn't overwhelmingly one-sided.
Yeah. I mean, I don't really want to get too political. I feel like you should be able to play tennis with whoever you want, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's another beautiful thing about Djokovic. Like he does not give a shit what people think about him.
Yeah.
Like
And
he's
you got to
there.
respect that at least, right? I mean,
Got
the
to.
ability to do what you feel is right, regardless of what other people are saying, is pretty, can be pretty difficult, I think.
hmm Yeah, and I thought it was hilarious because RFK was not even wearing tennis shoes. Like he didn't even look like he was wearing athletic shoes. They were like hiking shoes.
Yeah, what I gotta say about that one is I doubt RFK is like sliding around the court,
Yeah.
so it
Yeah, I know.
probably isn't damaging it too much, even if they are marking souls.
I know. And then another thing I wanted to cover this week that I saw was the lawsuit. The PTPA filed a lawsuit against the ATP and the WTA, alleging them as acting as a cartel, which suppresses wages, player opportunity, and rival tournaments to the harm of players and fans alike. So that's a direct quote from the lawsuit. It was filed on Tuesday, right before the main draw of the Miami Open. And this was interesting because you had specific players that were named in the lawsuit, Kyrgios being one of them, but none of the top players like want their name on this lawsuit. Like you have Zverev and Djokovic, who Djokovic is one of the founders of this players association, and then Zverev like sits on. I think he's the head counsel right now. It's a rotating residency, and obviously they're going to be asked about this. And I felt like they did a good job of tiptoeing around the question because they say that, they agree with some parts of the lawsuit and that players do need more rights and everything. But then they also kind of say, like, hey, we need to work with the ATP. The ATP is doing a good job of running this organization. So it was a very political answer. And I don't think they really want to get like too involved on one side or the other.
Yeah, I mean it's tough with players who are getting paid to play on the ATP tour
Yeah.
and then asking them to kind of like go against that and side with this lawsuit instead.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this really only affects the guys that are ranked outside the top 400, guys and girls too, because it's the WTA is also getting slapped here.
I agree because I feel like they added in that ATP baseline for the guys that are uh, inside the top 250. But if you're not inside of that ranking level, you're kind of just out in the wilderness, unable to really survive. I mean, I remember you talked about that video that Carousel published that talked about how he lost money playing professional tennis over the past year, and he wouldn't be able to do it if he didn't make money off of his social media. And I feel like that's the case for a lot of these players where they're just struggling along in a net negative, hoping they eventually get a breakout. But if they don't, they're just stuck losing money year after year.
Yeah, I agree. So we'll be following this closely. I don't see this actually getting litigated anytime soon. I feel like there will be some kind of settlement that happens behind closed doors, and we all know how things happen behind closed doors.
Yeah, 100%. In other news, I saw that Djokovic, with his most recent match win, got the Masters 1000 match win record. So he now has a 411 wins and 91 losses. He passes Nadal, who had 410 wins and 90 losses. Pretty interesting. They had nearly identical records. But the interesting thing about this is that Djokovic actually has four more Masters titles. So Nadal had a lot more deep runs where he ended up losing. But that pretty much wraps up like all of Nadal's records on or like on not clay surfaces. Like all of his remaining ones are pretty much on clay. So Djokovic just adding more and more to that GOAT argument. But with this, I had a question, just a quiz for you. Which Masters 1000 tournament do you think was Djokovic's most successful in three categories? The most titles he won, the most match wins total, and the highest match win percentage.
Ooh, that is a great question. I kind of want to say Cincinnati.
Cincinnati, he has three titles. He won, has 45 match wins there. That's not the answer. So the
Is it
most
on clay?
titles,
Wait, don't
the
tell me. Is it on clay?
it is not on clay.
Okay, I kind of knew that, but all right, give me the answer.
Most titles is actually Paris. He's won Paris
Oh,
7 different times. most match wins is or actually is on clay in Rome. He has
Hmm.
68 match wins in Rome and has 6 titles, so almost as many as Paris. And then the highest match win percentage is actually in Shanghai, where he's 39-6.
Yes, I actually do remember Shanghai now that I think about it because we were looking when we were breaking it down. I was looking at the previous winners and felt like it was every other year, you know?
Yeah, and I mean 39-6 is a lot
Yeah.
of. I think it was like 86%.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I don't know. Maybe you think he's still got more to go, more left in the
I
tank
mean,
with
he wants
Shanghai?
that 1,000 or what is it,
Yeah.
100 titles. So
Yeah, he does. At least it's something that's driving him, something he can look forward to.
100%. He has one more thing to get.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then what about you? Do you have any other stories to talk about?
Yeah, I do. I have more Mutet news here. We had another crash out this week. He had an incident where he sat down and refused to play in the middle of the match against Tabilo. So what happened here was his match against Tabilo, there was a heavy Chilean crowd. And of course, he was taunting him. You know, he was putting some hand gestures to the crowd when Tabilo missed a shot. He did it again when Tabilo double faulted. And then at that point, a fan like flipped him the bird, essentially, you know, the middle finger, and Mutet just lost it. He went over to the umpire. He said, "I'm not playing until you kick this fan out." The umpire never kicked the fan out. He was like telling him, you need to play. He sat down. He then got a point penalty and then still wouldn't get up, got a game penalty. So he lost the set on the point penalty and then got broken in the third set by getting the game penalty. So he was just like destined to lose this match. Like
Yeah.
he did lose it. But after the whole incident, he went to X and he posted pretty big thread here where he basically said, let's see. So the crowd was extremely hostile with deliberate noise in between his serves. You know, they're whistling, insults, gestures, and that he didn't react for the first hour and a half. But then it finally got to the point where if the umpire wasn't going to take control of the match, he had to. And then, it's I kind of hear him here, to be honest. Like it is the umpire's responsibility to tame the crowd. And if it's very overwhelming, and especially if people are making noises in between his serves, at that point, I feel like it's just not fair to the player to be playing in such a hostile environment.
Yeah, I think it's not even just a hostile environment, it's an unfair environment, right?
Hmm.
If they
Yeah.
start like intentionally trying to distract him while he's playing, that crosses a line. I feel like there's cheering for a certain player and making it a hostile environment is one thing where oh, everybody's on the side of Alcaraz, right?
Hmm.
Versus actually trying to interfere with the play. So yeah, I do think there's an extent to which the umpire should have maybe gotten more involved, but I think Mutet probably also could have handled it a little bit
Hmm.
better.
Totally, totally. And it was kind of like a he said, she said thing too, because the umpire, I think the supervisor came out and he went over to someone and tried to get to the bottom of this. And then he came back to Mutet and was like, no, you actually flicked the fan off first or something
Yeah,
like that. So unfortunately, couldn't get a break there. And I just think this is a pretty common thing with the Chilean crowd because we saw this in Miami last year with Jari versus Sayboth Wild. Like Sayboth Wild had the same exact complaints about the Chilean crowd.
yeah, they go crazy for those
They
Chileans.
do. It's basically a soccer match.
Exactly, exactly. They just need the flares and the stuff, the smoke in the crowd.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. But can you imagine too? Like, and these are played on the side courts too, so it's a very intimate environment.
100%. Yeah, that definitely can probably get pretty wild. And I understand that if a fan is really being that aggressive, yeah, they should get thrown out.
I agree. But at least on the bright side, we have a new beef that developed. We got the Mutet Tabilo
Yeah,
showdown.
100%. But anyway, how about a bet of the week? What'd you go for here?
Yeah, bet of the week. I'm taking Nakashima plus 160 over Dimitrov. So they have a 1-1 head to head, and Nakashima beat him on a hard court back in 2022 at the US Open. And I do think that Dimitrov is the better player. I just think it's a 50-50 chance here, like of going either way. And I feel like the odds for Nakashima are good enough to take that chance. Like there's
Yeah.
really not a whole lot to say.
Yeah,
I
and we
feel
did
like.
we did just talk about how underrated Nakashima is. So
Hmm.
he definitely could pull this out. We know Dimitrov sometimes just doesn't. It feels like sometimes Dimitrov plays just a little bit tired as the tournament goes on,
Hmm.
and you're not super shocked. I wouldn't be shocked to see him lose to Nakashima here.
Yeah, he's definitely susceptible. How about you? What are you taking this week, or who are you taking this week?
I'm going with Monfils plus 125 over Corda. Monfils has some pretty solid momentum, two big match wins, and Corda did have a big win over Tsitsipas. But overall, I feel like kind of like your bet. I feel like it could go either way, and I'm going with the underdog here. It also has to do with a little bit of Corda's inconsistency, where you never know match to match what level he's going to play at. So he may play super well against Tsitsipas, and the next match just play below his standard.
Yeah, this is crazy to me that Monfils is the underdog here. I feel like, yeah, Porta may be more talented, but I think overall, like Monfils might be better than him. I don't know at this current moment.
I think it's just the age factor, and I think Corda is ranked higher as well.
Yeah, crazy.
But anyway, how about a match of the week?
Match of the week. Speaking of Monfils, I actually this is second week in a row he's made it into my match of the week, but I took him clutching up against Munar this week. I just feel like he continues to defy the odds. Like every tournament, you're like, oh, Monfils, winning a couple rounds at 38 years old. It's crazy. And the way he does it too is so, I guess, astonishing to see him out there. Like he's not just shortening points. He's actually sticking in there and playing like long, gritty tennis. But um, one thing I really enjoyed about this match was just watching him and his ability to change the pace of the match. Because like in some points, you have him hitting very like heavy topspin with high margin, like low risk, just kind of rally shots. And then the other, you see him just ripping forehands in the corner, pinning Munar, and then either finishing at the net or like hitting a flat forehand, switching it up the side. But just pretty cool match too, because you had him take the first set. Monfils won 7-5, and then he lost the second 5-7, then went down a break 4-5 in the third. And I think this is where the match climaxed because Munar got the break and was essentially just serving for the match. And then Monfils broke back and sent the final set to a tiebreaker like he did last week in my match of the week. Just a um, great like match. I love seeing third set tiebreakers is what I'm trying to say here. And he ended up dominating the breaker and won the match in like the classic comeback fashion where, classic case of him just being a veteran player and knowing how to use the mental side of the game and like not giving up when he was down 4 or 5 in the last set.
Yeah, I think breakers are always great because it is really the entire match coming down to just a few points, and so every point has so much weight on it, and it just makes it very tense in the moment. So, yeah, I definitely enjoy those matches too. And Monfils has such a fun style of play that I'm on board with this match of the week.
Yeah, definitely. What about you? What was your match of the week?
I went with another exciting player, Shapovalov, and in his match against Tirante, I think he really showed how to keep a strong mentality, which is something we don't always see from Shapovalov. He often can get a little bit rattled, but this was a match where first up he was heavily favored, and that arguably already puts a lot more pressure on him. In the first set, he came out, handled business, won, got a break, and then in the second set, he ended up getting broken early, broke back, and then broke again and had a chance to serve it out at 5-4. On his serve, he goes up 40 love and then loses 5 points in a row, loses the game, goes on to get dominated in the tiebreak. And it's like, oh my God. So now you've gone from having 3 match points and being in this great position to all of a sudden now it's just 1-1. And you have to go into this third set with all the momentum on the other guy's side. But he was able to stay in it. He ended up actually breaking early in the third, then got broken back. The match ended up going to a second tiebreak, and Shapovalov got it done over an hour after his first 3 match points. So that's one part of it that I always kind of feel like is really tough mentally is every single point in that third set. You're like, oh my God, this match could have been finished half an hour ago, could have been finished 45 minutes ago, but he was able to stay mentally locked in and still close it out an hour later after that first opportunity he had.
Yeah, big step in the right direction for him here, because if we would have seen this a year ago, 2, 3 years ago, you already know after losing what, 3 match points, you're probably not going to win the match, especially for Chapo, just because of the fact that you harp on it and you think about it and it just kind of grinds you down.
100%. Unfortunately, he did just lose his match against Fritz, but
Fritz, yeah, and that was a
still,
rematch, right? Because he got the best of him in Dallas this
yeah.
year, which pretty surprising.
Yeah, that was a little bit of a shocker, but I think, yeah, you kind of expect Fritz to win that one, but
Uh-huh.
at least Chapo got the big win in the round before.
Yeah, speaking of, I feel like he, FAA, Hach, Kecmanovic, guys that were doing well in the beginning of the season, Davidovich, Fokina, like where are these guys now? I feel like we're not really hearing too much about them.
Yeah, I mean, especially FAA and Chapo were like kind of doing, yeah, stand out at the beginning of the
Hmm.
season. Now we're getting into like the higher level
Yeah.
tournaments. Maybe just because people care more. I don't know.
Yeah, interesting. All right, and that's the show. If you're not already subscribed, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. You can find us on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube at Painting Lines Podcast. Feel free to shoot us a DM or email us any questions or thoughts at paintinglinespodcast@gmail.com.